Welcome to the Doctor's Warren podcast, where our goal is to educate, empower, and equip you with the health and wellness knowledge to take your wellness to a whole nother level. We're going to use ancestral wisdom, clinical research, and over 25 years combined of clinical experience to bring you an all-in-one place to learn how to take your health to the next level. So welcome. I'm super excited you're here. Let's dive in. All right, guys. So we're going to dive into one of my favorite topics, nutrition, like beyond hormones, nutrition for a lifetime. I'm super excited to be able to share this with you guys. Nutrition is one of the topics that I have an absolute blast talking about, mainly because it changed my life, right? It changed my life back when I was in college. I had actually just started getting adjusted. I was seeing a chiropractor for the first time. My first chiropractor, Dr. Josh Axe, there in Nashville, and he kept encouraging me to start looking into my diet, changing my diet. So I started going to all different classes, listening to videos, listening to lectures and talks, and I just started little by little changing my diet. Which I think like back then, I'm like, man, all those years ago, it was pretty radical to be a 21-year-old changing your diet, shopping at Trader Joe's and Whole Foods when that wasn't the cool thing to do? So I started really prioritizing nutrition, and that kind of took me on this journey to where I am today. So I'm going to talk a lot about foundations and principles of nutrition. I think some of this is going to kind of challenge the way that you think a little bit in how you look at nutrition, and also kind of give you some clarity and some understanding on, how does nutrition affect our body? How do we know what diet is right for us? How do we know when to change things and when to bury things? And is there an optimal diet? We're going to dive into all of those things today. So I really think this is going to be beneficial to you guys, and I think that this will clear a lot of things up and really set you down the right path. Whether you've changed your diet like 10 years ago, whether you're a vegan, carnivore, keto, whatever that may be, I think this is going to be super beneficial for you. So let's kind of take a look and dive into this a little bit. So we're going to start here. The topic of nutrition can be super, super overwhelming and confusing, right? Like you guys know, you're probably like you're probably like us where, if you're in the listening to the podcast world, you're listening to, these videos, social media, influencers, all these different things. I mean, everybody thinks they have the perfect nutrition planned out, right? Like you're gonna hear the keto camp, right? Not specifically a podcast. We actually love Ben. Ben's unbelievable and is so in depth with all of this stuff. But I meant like the actual like group, right? That eats ketogenic, right? A lot of them are gonna be, I eat ketogenic, it changed my life. I'm gonna eat ketogenic forever, right? Or the vegan group, especially the vegan group. It's like we have to eat vegan, and if we don't eat vegan, our bodies are gonna shut down. We're gonna disappear off the planet, right? Well, like whatever it may be. Carnivore, high protein, low protein, and everybody like gets on these nutrition, kicks, and they're like, man, this really transformed my health and changed my life. Therefore, this is the way I'm supposed to eat forever. Okay. So that's where it gets confusing because you're like, wait a second, like, Time Magazine back in the 1960s puts it on the front of their magazine that says, oh, butter is so bad for us. And we start this whole journey with margarine and seed oils and all this stuff. And then 5 years ago, they put it on the front of their cover like butter is back, baby. And is actually good for you. It's like, man, what a confusing world that we live in when it comes to nutrition. And I have to point this out, right? Because when I look at nutrition and I am deciding, what do I need to do for a client or a patient or for myself, I have to break information down a little differently than I break down other things, right? So when I'm making a clinical decision on this, I have to take the information through a filter, right? To decide whether or not I think this is good, whether or not I don't think this is good. And my first filter is actually not clinical research. Okay. And, for some people, this may be shocking that especially that worship at the feet of research. But for nutrition, I don't do that. You know why? Because most nutritional studies out there is a load of crap. Okay. They're very weak studies. You're not going to find super robust clinical trials done on nutrition. You're just not. Most studies are done using food index surveys that are super weak in their efficacy. I mean, imagine this, right? Imagine somebody sending you something in the mail that says, "Hey, I know you're joining this study. I here is this packet that I want you to fill out. Please write down everything you ate last month." Okay, dude, like, I don't know about you, but, like, I don't even remember what I ate yesterday, right? Like, if you told me to sit down and write what I ate yesterday between my 3 kids, coaching all these sports, running our business, like, I don't remember what I ate. I know I did eat, right? And maybe yesterday I could sit down and think about it, but last week? No way, dude, that's not happening. So, they're mostly based off these food index surveys, and we get in trouble with that, right? So that's why you're really not going to find a lot of super robust studies on specific types of diet and nutrition. And then the other part of it as well is there's so much bias in the world of nutrition, right? Like, I mean, Harvard University is a perfect example of this. I mean, some of the crap they put out on nutrition just blows my mind. It is specifically you're always gonna find has an agenda to push a plant-based diet, and also has some other agendas kinda hidden within that. All you gotta do is go look at the funding. You're gonna see things like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You're gonna see things like Pepsi Cola. You're gonna see all of these different, organizations that kinda team up and fund those type of studies, and all you gotta do is go read into what these people, are trying to accomplish, and you start to realize, wow, there's a lot of bias in this, right? Like putting out studies that are like trying to show butter is bad for you. They did one more recently where they put people into 4 different levels, right? 4 different groups. And they gave them different amounts. They had one group that didn't do any butter. They had, level 2 where it did, a little bit of butter, very, very minimal. And then they had level 3 that did, kind of a moderate amount, level 4 that supposedly did a high amount of butter. The caveat to this is when you read into the study, right, the headlines say, "Ooh, butter is gonna increase your heart disease, and it's gonna decrease your lifespan." But then you read into the study and you're like, "Oh, wait a second. First problem with this study is the groups that were using butter, it says butter or butter-like margarine. So wait a second. So you're telling me the group that we're trying to compare seed oils and butter to decide which one is going to be better and decrease your lifespan can actually also consume like seed oils and crap oil? Like, wait a second. Like, there's your first flaw, and it's a major flaw, and it actually tears down the entire study. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is when you look into it, you're like, wait a second, level 3 and level 4, like, really, there wasn't a major difference at all, even clinically relevant difference between their lifespan. And yet, when you dig into it, they basically said, okay, so level 3 and level 4, there wasn't a statistical relevance in their lifespan, even though, level 4 was eating more butter or butter-like substance than level 3. But what we're going to do is because there was a slight difference between level 1 and level 4, now we're just going to say, oh my goodness, you know what? A tablespoon or 2 tablespoons of butter will decrease your lifespan, right? And it's unbelievable because between, level 3 and level 1, there wasn't a statistical difference there. So you can start to see how you can manipulate data. And then the headlines say butter will decrease your lifespan. So I don't base what I do clinically, especially with nutrition. My first filter is not clinical research. Doesn't mean I don't consider it, but it's not my first filter. So when we look overall at what do I filter information for nutrition, I'll kind of just give you some of my filters. Um, for me, one of the things I look at is my faith. That's one of the things that I filter nutrition through, knowing for me that, hey, there's actually a lot of great information, in the Bible, biblically about nutrition, things like that. Does it make sense with how I think? Like when I look at how God created, animals and fruit and vegetables, and how we intended like the soil to be, like land to be, those type of things, those play a role in it. Number two, ancestral wisdom. How did our ancestors eat genetically? What were they designed to eat? Different parts of the world. What are some of the commonalities that we're going to get into? So ancestral wisdom is a big thing. And then clinical results, right? What do I see with my patients? I've been practicing now, 11 years. So we've seen tens of thousands of patients. I've been able to look at not just how do they feel, right? Which is very, very important, by the way, even though the research world kind of throws that one out, like there's no relevance in how an individual feels. But also, like, I've been able to look at stool tests and blood tests and Dutch tests and hormones and all of these different things, organic acids tests. I've been able to look at these and then be able to decide, like, is it making a clinical difference, right? So these are more of the filters that I use, including common sense, right? Logic. For me, it's like genetically modified food. Do I think, man can engineer something better than what, God can? No, I don't. I think that's silly, and we're playing with fire there. That doesn't make any sense to me. So if it logically doesn't make sense as well, I'm not going to do it. And to me, those are a lot more strong filters in clinical research when it comes to nutrition. So now that we've kind of gotten that out of the way, let's go over some principles here. Like when we think about all these different diets, the bottom line is they all have something that works, right? Otherwise, people wouldn't do it. And I think we have to recognize that, right? Whether we're talking about keto, vegan, carnivore, high protein, low protein, there are times that all of these diets have something that works with them, right? So to answer the first big question, is there one optimal human diet? No way, dude. No, there's not. There's not. So let's kind of dive into what we do have to look at. Like, stop focusing on calories in, calories out. Okay? That is not what nutrition is, right? When we think about consuming real food, we have to think about it from the standpoint of food is number one, it's your body utilizes it to make energy. Number two, it's information, right? Number three, it's frequency input into the cell. There's so many things that food does, but the magic is not in the food. You ready for this? If you have an apple, right, and we know this apple is full of all kinds of amazing nutrients, if you set that apple beside you and you look at it, is there anything special that happens in the human body when you look at the apple? No, there's nothing magical about the apple. What's amazing, though, is how your body can consume that apple and turn that into information and living tissue. Right? That's what's amazing. So we have to think about it from the body's perspective, the terrain perspective, what we're putting into our terrain. That terrain is what's the most important part of the nutrition focus. The only caveat to the calories in, calories out is that one of the trends that we're seeing a lot of, is unfortunately a lot of people in the health world. You guys you're eating like birds, right? Like you're consuming very, very little calories. And that can be a very big problem over time. And unfortunately, in the scientific world, they kind of put fasting and calorie restriction in the same category, and those are not the same thing. I promise you that, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Food is molecular and subatomic energy and information. That's what it is, right? Like it very, very powerful. We have to focus on the essentials and building blocks. Okay. This is another thing. This is where the research does start to speak, very, very loudly. So I'm not looking at necessarily clinical research on specific type of diets, but I do like to look at clinical research on the importance of essential fatty acids and essential amino acids. And what do they do inside the human body? What do they do inside the human cell? How do they build up things like essential fatty acids, building up things like our hormones, building up things like, our brain, and building up things like, our cell membranes and those type of things, essential amino acids, how they build up our DNA, how they build up muscle tissue. Those are the things that are clinically relevant and research relevant, right? So we have to focus on the essentials, the building blocks of life in the human body. Here's another principle. And this is part of the reason that, when you make that dietary switch, let's say you've been, vegan for a long time, and then boom, you switch it over to, ketogenic or paleo or carnivore. And it's like all of a sudden you feel absolutely amazing. You're like, man, my whole body and physiology is changing. Like I'm starting to build muscle. I'm starting to feel really great. My digestive system's improving. What is a major part of that? A major part of that is diet variation. And this is a principle that you have to remember for a lifetime, right? Remember the title of this presentation is nutrition across a lifetime. There is one major fact that kind of goes across all ancestral cultures, maybe a couple variables on the end. Okay. Maybe some of the, the Inuit population that lived in a very, very cold environment, their diet didn't have too much variation to it. And then maybe also like some island, like civilizations where it was like basically the same weather all the time, even though I'd argue with weather patterns, storms, hurricanes, even season can kind of change what is available, especially when we're looking at fish and seafood and that type of thing. But most ancestral backgrounds were forced into diet variation. I would even argue fasting variation. And therefore, their genetics are basically the exact same as our genetics. What does that mean for us? We are built for variation, which means based on, seasons, right? Based on, if you have Native American in your genetic, or Northern European, guess what? Based on the seasons, that's going to tell you what was available. So maybe in the cold months, you relied more on your hunting and fishing skills, right? You had to get big bang for your buck. And they would kind of shift over into, like more of a carnivore ish type diet. Or, maybe in the spring and summer, guess what? There's wild berries and, nuts and seeds and wild plants that were available, and they were able to utilize those. Even in the kind of the modern farming world, like, guess what? Seasons and if you're buying local food, things don't always grow. Like if you're buying local food from a local farmer, they're not growing tomatoes in January, right? Like it's just not happening. But they will grow tomatoes as we get into the summer. When are strawberries available? Mostly in the summer, right? Like you start to see these natural variations based on what is available. And we are designed for diet variation. We're designed for exercise variation. We're designed for fasting variation. And this is where this word comes into play called hormesis. What does hormesis mean? Hormesis is a type of stressor, right? But it's a stressor that produces a good result. Perfect example of this is when you go to the gym, right? When you're working out, you are pushing the body. What's happening? You are breaking down muscle tissue. Let's be very clear about that, right? Exercise does not build muscle when you're doing it. You are breaking things down. You are getting micro tears in those fibers. You are breaking it down. Then what does the body do with that stressor? It produces a stronger human being, right? When you fast, that is a stressor on the human body. What does it have to do? It has to make genetic switches where it says, you know what? I've got to prioritize protecting good parts of me and I got to break down the bad parts of me. That's amazing, right? You thrive off of this hormesis, right? This hormetic stress. It is a stressor that produces a good result. That's what diet variation does. And I've seen it over and over and over again. And one of the biggest examples I see in the office over the years is we'll have a patient that comes in and, let's say they have high blood glucose, their fasting insulin is super high, their C-peptide is high. So we know this human being, this individual is insulin resistant, right? So we start them on this journey, let's say of a ketogenic diet, kind of a paleo ketogenic diet, which means what? Real food, ketogenic diet, not a bunch of these like, hey, I'm going to buy this keto bread that has 75 ingredients in it and a bunch of crap. Like, no, 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 like a real food ketogenic diet. And like, man, we get to see their fasting insulin start to come down, C-peptides start to come down, their glucose is coming down, they're losing weight, they're feeling really good, their hormones are optimizing, their inflammation is going down. It's amazing. Now it's been like, 3 to 6 months, and then they come in and they say, Dr. Nathan, this diet has changed my life, but now I've kind of hit this plateau, like I'm no longer losing weight like I was. I feel like I'm not having like the energy that I was having before. I'm just not quite feeling the same. Like, do I need to go more keto? I was only eating 20 grams of carbs a day. So do I need to cut it back to 10 or to 5 or to none? And I'm like, okay, ready for this? I want you to go home and I want you to make you like, a big sweet potato, maybe put some raw honey on something, maybe go eat some really good almond flour cookies that have a little bit of coconut sugar in it. And they're like, what? They're scared to death to put a carbohydrate in their mouth. And then I finally get through to them. They do it. And then they come back, that next Monday or Tuesday, it's been a weekend. And they're like, oh my gosh, I dropped 3 pounds over the weekend when I added carbohydrates back in. And I'm like, is there magic in those carbohydrates? Heck no, there's magic in diet variation, right? You changed it up. You actually made the body, you gave it a hormetic stress where you switched it up. And then boom, that's where the magic happens. Our body, our DNA, our genetics, our ancestral background is built for diet variation. So I would argue, unless there's a specific clinical reason why a human being is eating a certain way. For example, we know that certain types of seizures really respond well to a ketogenic diet. Unless there's a specific reason, right? Like we're all built for diet variation. Okay. That is a principle that we always need to remember. So I like to go through this because this is what influences diet choice. This should tell you why there's no such thing for every single individual on this planet as one individual optimal human diet, because these are the things that go into it, right? We talked about genetics. We talked about ancestral background. And Dr. Rebecca is Dominican and Puerto Rican. Her ancestry is a lot different than mine, right? It's Native American and Northern European and kind of a mixture of those. Like our ancestral background is like completely different. So to think that we would consume the same foods all the time as each other is wild in the first place. Blood type, innate intelligence, right? What is our body telling us that we need? There was a book out there called Nourishment that talks about ruminant animals, and this was a researcher and biologist that studied ruminant animals for like 35 years, and he talked about how the sheep and the lamb, they would when they would eat like on grasses and bushes and things like that, they would change it based on what their palate was telling them they needed, right? If they were lacking a nutrient, a vitamin, a mineral, whatever that may be, they changed it based on what they needed. And the argument in that book, and they've actually got a couple really cool studies in that book, um, show that, hey, maybe as human beings, we have something very similar, but maybe we've lost that a little bit over time because we've been eating all these hyper palatable foods that we never should have been in contact with, AKA Mountain Dew, Doritos. Like these things are like, you put them in your mouth and your body's like, what the heck am I experiencing right now? The high amounts of sugar that we consume for years, these, aspartame and sucralose that are way too sweet. These things like change and shift our brain. So we may have lost a little bit of that over time. Gut condition, right? What does the terrain look like? If I have a patient coming in and they have irritable bowel syndrome or Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and if I put them on a completely plant-based diet, they are gonna feel like crap most of the time. But then if I shift them over to a carnivore diet, like all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, my skin is clearing up, my digestive system's improving, my inflammation is going down. What does the terrain look like that you're putting the food into? Age, right? Age, we know that as we age, we should be getting, more amino acids, more good quality protein into the diet. Why? Because again, we're aging. We need to really prioritize muscle protein synthesis and how we're building up muscle, which is our biggest fat burner. It's kind of like our furnace of the human body, but also too to be able to hold us upright, to keep that head back over the shoulders, to keep us well balanced. These things are super, super important. Food availability. What's available in your area? What are you able to get? That can influence your diet choice. Clinical research, you see how I put that low? And maybe one that should be towards the top of the list, N equals one. How do I feel? Right? What are the things I notice in my own body when I eat a certain way? If I ate a plant-based diet and all of a sudden I started seeing like eczema patches pop up, or my energy levels tank, or I'm always moody, like, hey, maybe you need to eat a grass-fed burger, right? Like maybe you need to introduce a bison steak in there. Like N equals one is vitally important. How do we feel? Right? When we're eating a certain way. These are all influences on diet choice, which shows you, again, there's no such thing as an optimal diet for every individual on this planet. Common ground. Here we go. So these are the things that we can start to prioritize. Why? Because whether we're talking about a plant-based diet or we're talking about a carnivore diet, these are the things that we have to focus on when it comes to nutrition. Minimal processing. Okay. When we look at minimal processing, processed versus non-processed versus ultra processed. This is one that we know, right? And I think the good news is I believe we're about to change this, right? At least from our country's standpoint. I think other countries have already done this. Clearly defining the difference between ultra processed food and processed food. Okay. Let me give you an example. For those of you that have eaten something like, let's use like Siete chips as an example, right? Say we want to eat potato chips. Okay, Siete's chips, we're going to look at those ingredients. We're like, oh, organic potatoes, sea salt, right? Avocado oil. So is that still a processed food? Yeah, it has to be processed in a plant, right, to make that. Versus ultra processed. Now let's compare Siete's potato chips to, let's say, something like Lay's or something, some other brand. And then we look at it and we're like, potatoes. And then we look in and we go read into potatoes and we're like, oh man, these things could be sprayed with, herbicides and fungicides. And especially with potatoes, like, fungal overgrowth is a big deal. They're sprayed with all this crap. Oh man, by the way, they're using seed oil. They're using oil that's not good for me. And they're not using sea salt. They're using like just 97% sodium chloride. All of a sudden, that's a completely different food, right? Are they both processed? Yeah, they're both processed, but the nutrient density and the differences in how they're made, completely different, right? Completely different. Olipop compared to Mountain Dew, right? Those are two different things, right? One of them's got artificial flavors, artificial colors, a high crappy amount of high fructose corn syrup. Where the other one, it's got, like, slippery elm bark and prebiotics and, cassava syrup, that's different when you're putting it in the body and its glucose response. All of a sudden, these are 2 completely different things. Are they both processed? Yeah, they're both processed. They're made in a plant. But are they the same type of food? No, they are not, right? No, they are not. And we really should be eating, and this kind of goes down to my last point there. Food is close to its original state of life or growth, the way that God designed it. This is very, very important. This is the difference between eating meat, that comes from a farm that has, 700,000 cattle that never see the light of day. They're herded into a small space. They're not eating grass. They're eating genetically modified corn, and they're eating a bunch of like grains, and that's how they're fed. And they've got disease, and compared to like a local farmer who's, these cows are on pasture their entire life. They're in the sunshine. They're living a good life. Those are 2 completely different things, right? So we should be eating food as close to its original state of life or growth, the way that God designed it. Very, very important. Nutrient density. We should pay attention to this. Again, whether we are on a plant-based diet or a carnivore diet or a keto diet or a paleo diet, is it high in vitamins and minerals and essential amino acids and essential fatty acids and antioxidants? These are the main categories we should be focused on. You know why? Because the clinical research does show that, guess what? Fat soluble vitamins are absolutely amazing for protecting our immune system, supporting hormone optimization, helping to support skin and our ability to fight off viruses, bacterial infections, our ability to fight off cancer cells, minerals, how important those are to get into the cell and make sure that we are able to absorb different nutrients into the cell, and that keeps like cell to cell communication happening on a regular basis. Amino acids, essential amino acids, building up muscles and muscle protein synthesis, and how we're able to protect our DNA and build up our genetics, fatty acids, right? And how they're able to build up our brain and our cell membranes, where all of our hormone receptors are, antioxidants, how much are we breaking down the oxidative damage throughout the day? What the amount of inflammation we have in our body? These are all vitally important to focus on. So no matter what diet we choose, it should be nutrient dense. This is why if I put a patient on a carnivore diet, guess what? They're eating nose to tail. They're consuming bone broth and meat stock and organ meats, and they're varying the type of food that they're consuming. One day they may consume, a 6-ounce bison steak, bison ribeye, and then later that day they're consuming wild caught salmon, along with, maybe some oysters that they got that contain a high amount of minerals, and then they're consuming, bone broth. That also has like some beef tallow in it and good fat, essential fatty acid. So again, they're getting that varied state, which is super important. Um, no to GMOs, right? GMOs stand God move over, just not something that you want to do. I promise you this, like, man is not going to create food better than what has already been created. Like, even if you believe that, I'm sorry, you're wrong. It's not going to happen. Say no to the food that is sprayed with everything. Glyphosate is the most water soluble toxin on the planet, and it is awful. It has been patented as an antibiotic. It's been patented as a chelator, which is scary as crap, right? Like, we do not want to consume food that has been sprayed with this. Glyphosate increases your zonulin levels, opens up those tight junctions in the gut, creates leaky gut, creates disease. Oh, by the way, we've already known these companies have been sued for billions of dollars because they showed that, again, it is correlated to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Again, more to come with that type of stuff. So we want to say no to the sprays. We want to say no to the genetically modified organisms. Variations in prep techniques, right? Like, again, whether we're talking about carnivore or we're talking about plant-based, we should be using prep techniques that our ancestors have used for years, and even modern ones that we've seen are really cool. Like some of them, like things like sous vide and doing things like, pressure cooking and varying the heat that we're using, fermentation techniques, soaking, sprouting, natural preservation, fermentate. All these things are super important, and getting a variation within what we're utilizing to prep these foods, and soaking, sprouting, breaking down some of those anti-nutrients that may be hard for our body to be able to consume, and unlocking other nutrients that are fantastic for the body. No seed oils, period. I really do not care what the media says. I don't care what Harvard University may say. These oils are not fit for human consumption, right? There is a direct variation. Like if you follow the line of chronic disease in our country, when we started taking out real fat and we started introducing all of these seed oils, disease processes skyrocketed. Diabetes, cancer, heart disease, all of these things skyrocketed. And I'm telling you right now, there is no place for these oils. They will destroy your cell membranes. They will make you insulin resistant. They will make you hormone resistant. Hey, if we're talking about the thyroid, these are going to affect the way that your thyroid hormone is not only converted, assimilated, used, but also like able to bind to that receptor, get in the cell, and become bioactive. Besides things like raw honey and fruit, like in some of those things, we need to keep our glycemic load decently low, right? This is important for the most part. Like if we're consuming a diet that's super high in sweet foods all the time and high in glucose, guess what? That is going to make us have more glucose insulin responses over a lifetime. That is a great way to decrease our longevity. So we want to be able to keep that pretty low. And then we need to focus on high amounts of essential amino acids, essential fatty acids. Why? Because those are the building blocks of life. Did you hear what I said there? I did not say essential carbohydrates. Why? Because they're not essential. Now, does that mean they're all bad? Heck no. Do they have a place that can really build up health in the human body? Absolutely. I'm not telling you to be scared of carbohydrates, but I am telling you our biggest focus should be on the essentials, essential amino acids, essential fatty acids. Why? Because these are the building blocks of life in the human body. All right, so kind of dove into that. Let's touch on this a little bit more. Essential amino acids, why are they important? Muscle protein synthesis, right? We want to build up muscle. We already established when you go work out, you are not building muscle, you are tearing down muscle. What helps us to build the muscle? Essential amino acids, right? And hormones, right? I'll put hormones in there too. This is why kids, growing up, they eat like birds, and yet, when you look at them, for some reason, they still are able to grow, right? They're still able to build muscle. Why? Because they have hormones on their side. Then we get older, hormones aren't quite what they used to be, right? So what are we going to do to build muscle protein synthesis? Essential amino acids, super, super important. DNA, cellular structure, how cells function, neurotransmitters, how the brain works, right? Super important. How we feel, how we move, how, our brain responds to stress, what keeps us happy, what keeps us in a good mood, and hormones. These essential amino acids are very important. Essential fatty acids, important for the cell membranes. Life begins and ends on the cell membrane. One of our mentors, Dr. Dan Papa, has really put this into our brain. And I truly believe that there is absolute amazing things that happen on the cell membrane. When we look at the structure of it, that's where your receptors for your hormones are. So when you're talking about how do I get rid of insulin resistant? How do I get rid of thyroid hormone resistant? Support your cell membranes. Vitally important. If you damage the cell membrane enough, you're going to change that cell either into a cancer cell or, again, that cell is going to die. So we know that's vitally important. Our brain, our hormones, is super important for essential fatty acids. The seed oil dangers, here's where we kind of get into some of those. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Like, bottom line is just don't consume them, right? Do not consume these. And these are things like soybean oil, cottonseed oil, corn oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil. If it's in its raw, undenatured state, like sometimes we'll use like Andrea's seed oils. That is raw. It's undenatured. It has not been oxidized. We can use those for some really important omega-6s in the body. But we're talking about in processed food, or we're talking about cooking food with these things. We do not want that, right? And instead, we want stable fats like, grass-fed butter, grass-fed tallow, bison fat, duck fat, things like avocado oil, maybe some coconut oil in moderation, things like organic olive oil. These are fantastic oils. These are what we want. Why? Here's some of the consequences of that. We know seed oils undergo oxidation during the processing part, right? When we're cooking, even once they're open, just from their processing in a plant, they form toxic byproducts, increasing oxidative stress and inflammation at a cellular level. They also damage and integrate into our cell membranes. This is important for cell signaling and impairing the way our mitochondria function. Oh, and by the way, impairing the way our hormones function. Thyroid hormone? Yes. Metabolic consequences. They lead to issues with things like leptin and ghrelin and some of these uncontrollable hunger, hormones. Inflammatory fat accumulation, building up that visceral fat that's so damaging to the human body. And not to mention things like arterial plaquing and destabilizing blood sugar regulation. Depression, mood changes. I'm telling you, these seed oils have a major, impact on that, including gut inflammation, neurodegeneration, diabetes, and cancer. If you want to take a chance, roll the dice, eat seed oils. I am not going to. My patients are not going to. And I'm going to scream this from the rooftops. Stop consuming seed oils. They are dangerous. Um, you know, when we look at like some of these inaccuracy points, like, by all means read through these. This is kind of like comparing the data. When you look at more of like the USDA information, like, kind of what we're consuming, from a country standpoint, this is where you're going to get more quality type of studies and seeing how much more we're consuming. Like here's a good breakdown of it. Basically 400 calories a day, coming from these seed oils, comparing like, 1977 to 2018. Like, guess what, guys? Chronic disease has skyrocketed. Our use of medications has skyrocketed. Heart disease, cancer, these are still the top two disease killers in the United States. What's the difference? Our caloric intake, quote unquote, has gone up. What have they gone up from? Consuming these seed oils. These seed oils are massively dangerous. So let's dive into some different types of diets that I think are important. How do we know when we should utilize a ketogenic diet? Okay. A ketogenic diet is massively powerful. Okay. A ketogenic diet is not a fad, even though on social media, like it blew up for like 3 or 4 years. And now, like, everybody's like, oh, I'm tired of keto. It's no longer cool. Right. Let's shift over to something different. Um, ketogenic diet is massively important. And Dr. Rebecca and myself, we have certain periods of the year where we go into ketosis. Even I would argue, like for me, it's on a weekly basis, right? Ketogenic diet has been shown to reduce inflammation, optimize hormones, brain and nerve support, right? This is why ketogenic diet is associated with improvements in things like neurocognitive decline and things like MS and Parkinson's and some of these. Is there going to be good double-blind randomized control trials that happen to show this? No, but there is some really cool anecdotal evidence, and I've seen it clinically to support this. Improve insulin sensitivity, being able to support the cell membrane. Ketogenic diet can be very, very important. Listen, bottom line is we should be able, in the lack of food. So if our ancestors did not have food available, they went hunting, they went fishing, they went looking for food, and they couldn't find it, guess what? They were forced to fast. What happens in the body to help them survive? Now they're producing ketones, they're utilizing ketones, right? And they're burning ketones, which is very, very efficient fuel. It's super efficient fuel. And yet they didn't die, right? Instead, their body was actually optimized so that they could go out and hunt and fish and gather food when it was available. We've got to be able to produce ketones and utilize ketones, at some parts during the day. So I like to utilize a ketogenic diet when somebody has insulin resistance, right? When they have a lot of inflammation, when they have a lot of visceral fat, right? When we're trying to get the body well, this is a great diet to be able to utilize. And then once they're able to, get these things under control and see some really big improvements, then we like to talk about metabolic flexibility. What does that mean? So like for me, eating well across like over a decade has allowed me to be able to, I will consume mostly good healthy fat and protein in the morning, again, kind of same thing around lunch. And then dinner, I'll consume, some more good healthy carbohydrates, maybe it's sweet potatoes, maybe it's, some dessert that has raw honey in it. Maybe it's some different fruit later on in the day, and my body can take in, right, that glucose and sometimes some of that fructose from certain fruits. It can take that in, and then boom, my muscles are using it, my brain is using it, and then I'm fasting through the night into the next morning. Guess what? I'm back in ketosis again. Maybe it's minor, right? Like, zero point 0.5, but still my body's producing ketones again. That's metabolic flexibility, right? And we should be able to get there. And a ketogenic diet can be very powerful in those situations. So it is a very, very good tool to utilize. And I would argue again, most of our ancestors were having to be in ketosis, whether forced via the diet and what was available, or whether forced from fasting and what was not available and being forced into fast and actually producing ketones, burning ketones, utilizing ketones. So that's where a ketogenic diet can be very helpful. Mediterranean diet, and really it shouldn't say vegan, it should say plant-based. Um, unless it's like for religious purposes, like again, my job as a practitioner, if your faith and religion is completely tied up in eating a vegan diet, like I am not going to set out to change that with you, right? Like that's none of my business. I'm not going to do that. Um, but for the most part, like if it's not, and you just think that a vegan diet is super super healthy, I would say think again. It is so hard to be a vegan and to get everything that you need. It's so hard, right? In can you argue that, yeah, I can get all my essential amino acids by mixing foods and doing that? Yeah, you can, but understand you are going to have to eat a massive amount of food and consume a massive amount to get the equivalent of what you would get from animal-based amino acids. So can you do it? Yeah. Is it going to take more work? Absolutely. Is it going to take more money? No doubt it is. If you're doing it the right way. Because when you look at it, you have to be cautious, right? The essential amino acid combinations, some of the vitamins that you find major deficiencies in. And again, I'm talking about over a decade of clinical practice, what I see, not just from analyzing diets, but actually looking at organic acid tests and measuring vitamins and minerals and seeing this vitamin B2, vitamin B9, vitamin B12. We know that over 50% of the population has methylation issues. If you don't have a proper amount of those, you could be destroying your brain, your hormones, and the way you detoxify and the way you utilize B vitamins. And you're wondering why now you're 80 and your whole entire body is falling apart. Zinc, carnitine, choline. Choline is huge for the way the brain works. This is why I am not, and I will be very clear about this, I am not a fan of having kids on a vegan diet. Like literally ever, because they need choline to build their brain. And I'm sorry, it is not available in abundance in plant, in a vegan diet. You have to really go out and utilize things like chlorella and spirulina and microalgae, and some of these like superfoods. So guess what? It's going to cost you more money to be able to do that. And then you're going to have to consume a lot more. K2, vitamin K2, vitally important, right? For preventing heart disease and plaquing in the arteries. K2 is what literally helps to guide calcium to go where it's supposed to go. AKA now you're putting calcium in your arteries and it's not going into the bone. Now you got osteopenia, osteoporosis. K2 is vitally important. Some of those fat soluble vitamins, very important. Another one that I've seen a lot of, there is a lot of people when we do nutrigenomic testing that guess what? They do not have the ability to convert beta carotene, so plant-based vitamin A, into usable vitamin A in the human body like retinol. They can't do it, right? Genetically, they cannot do it. So they're consuming all of these plant-based sources of beta carotene. And guess what? They are massively deficient in vitamin A. Now their body is showing symptoms of that. So that's my caveat to that. If it's something that you are like, no, Dr. Nita, I hear you, but like I truly believe I've got to eat a vegan diet. Well, you better make sure you do it the right way. It still better be full of tons of essential amino acids, combinations of food to get those. I would argue things like hemp seeds and chia seeds and chlorella and spirulina and bee pollen and some of these superfoods should be consumed, to be able to meet the demand of what your body needs. But where a more plant-based diet or let's say a diet that's rich, right? Like in, fruit and vegetables and nuts and seeds, which have so much nutrient density, things like a Mediterranean diet. Listen, why is a Mediterranean diet always one of the most popular diets that seem to have one of the biggest benefits on human health? Why? Because it's loaded with antioxidants, loaded tons of olive oil and rosemary and oregano and all these herbs, tons of different fruit, right? Berries that are loaded with antioxidants. Why is this important? It lowers our oxidation on our cells and it helps to lower inflammation. The more we decrease oxidative stress, again, the healthier our cells are, the less aging we're going to see in our cells. So super, super important there. Microbiome diversity, right? When you add in, some of these amazing nutrient-dense plant-based foods, what ends up happening? Right? You load the body with like good types of fiber that end up feeding your microbiome. We see really cool things that start to happen with that. So again, plants have their place. There is like certain camps that are like, oh my gosh, don't ever consume plant toxins. Listen, I take a middle ground with this. If you have autoimmune issues and you have major gut dysfunction and issues with your gut, guess what? Plant toxins can rip you up and create all kinds of different symptoms. Why? It's not about the plants. It's about the terrain they're going into, right? And they're escaping the line of the gut. They're having the body actually attack itself. Why? Because those are foreign things in the bloodstream that the body says they can't be there. It's more about the terrain, right? So we have to take care of our terrain. But introducing some of these fibrous foods in a good terrain really helps flourish the microbiome and helps us produce some really good bacteria in the gut and on the skin and those type of things. So it can have a really, really good place, for it when needed, right? I've even seen too, guys, where if I've had patients that have been, they've been on like a high protein diet for a while to really build up the body, then I'll have them occasionally throw in a week where they do a lower protein diet. Why? Just to switch it up, right? And they're eating more plant-based foods. And most of the time, if they have a good terrain, they come back to me and they're like, oh my gosh, I feel so good, right? Like I feel really good. Why? Because they had a hormetic stress, right? A stress that produced a really, really good result inside the human body and with your health. Putting it together, right? Whether it's plant-based, whether you're carnivore, we need good healthy fat. Here's some examples of good healthy fat, right? When we're talking about plant-based fat, avocados, olives, coconuts, right? Meat, milk, the cream, nuts. I would argue with most nuts, getting them sprouted, soaking it. You can do it yourself, or now there's great brands out there that you can buy them already soaked and sprouted. You can buy the flour that comes from, almonds and, things like walnuts and stuff that are already sprouted, and soaked for you to be able to use. Seeds, chia seeds, flaxseed, hemp seeds, sesame seed. Like these things can be really, really great. Best consumed like, fresh or freshly ground. Like flax, if you're buying a bunch of flaxseed that's already like been, milled up, guess what? After about 15 to 20 minutes, that's already oxidized, right? We don't want that. If you're going to use flaxseed and you're going to utilize the flax mill, hey, get a coffee grinder, grind it up, and then we put it on our food, right? We eat it within like 15, 20 minutes. Very, very important. We want these things fresh. I love chia seeds. I love hemp seeds, especially if the terrain is good for it. Man, these things can be super powerful foods loaded with omega-3, omega-6, omega-9, fatty acids. These are huge. Um, things like animal-based, good healthy fat, grass-fed butter or grass-fed ghee that's clarified butter, low in lactose, kind of lactose and casein free. Good quality fatty fish, salmon, sardines, mackerels, anchovies, pasture-raised meats, and eggs that contain a lot of these. Organ meats, liver, kidney, right? These type of things. Raw cheese, coming from good quality dairy sources. I will say, I don't consume any dairy that it has A1 casein in it. My family, if we consume dairy, it's going to be usually in its raw state, coming from a great local farm. And usually it is going to be full fat, and it's also going to be from an A2 source, right? Whether it's goat's milk, sheep's milk, A2 certified cows, right? These are very, very important to kind of pay attention to. So if you are going to consume some dairy, make sure it's coming from a really, really good source there. Other good healthy fats, some good animal-based cooking fats, tallow, which is beef fat, lard, which is pork fat, coming from like again, really, really well-raised animals, duck fat, goose fat, suet, like, schmaltz, which is chicken fat, plant-based cooking fats, organic extra virgin olive oil that is raw, really, really great there. In moderation, some extra virgin coconut oil, avocado oil, these are really, really great things to be able to cook with and consume on a regular basis. Here's some of the fats to avoid, which we've talked about these. These polyunsaturated fatty acids, they promote oxidative stress. Oh, yeah, by the way, they're refined, they're bleached, they're deodorized using chemicals, they're unstable. These are things like canola, soybean, corn, sunflower, unless, again, like I mentioned, like Andrea seed oils, if it's cold pressed, we're using it as a supplement, we're not cooking with it. High oleic sunflower oil occasionally is kind of like that middle ground. Is it great to consume a lot of it? No. Is it as bad as some of the others? No. Cottonseed, grapeseed, rice bran, these are things we want to stay away from. Obviously, the margarine and stuff like junk. Um, Protein sources, right? Here's where we get some really great protein sources. And I kind of gave you a breakdown like grams per ounce so you can get good bang for your buck. Because here's the bottom line, right? One of the things we should all have in common when we eat that first meal of the day, whatever time that may be, whether you're somebody who intermittent fast in a way that's like, hey, I stop eating dinner at 5 o'clock and I fast through the night, and then I eat my first meal decently early, like breakfast. It's chill. Or you're somebody who's like, you know what, life is kind of crazy right now. I eat my last meal at 8:30. So then I fast till 11:30 the next day. Whenever you eat that first meal, it should be, again, whether plant-based or whether we're talking about, carnivore or keto or paleo, we really should be focused on good, healthy protein, good, healthy fat for that first meal of the day, not a ton of carbohydrates, right? So, we really should prioritize essential fatty acids, getting our good protein load, 30 to 50 grams of protein for that first meal of the day, really getting our bang for our buck to build up our body. And so you have to kind of prioritize what works best for you. When I kind of set off on this journey to eat more protein, since it had been like 12 years of, not prioritizing protein, it was hard. It was hard to get all the protein load. Usually weigh about 120 pounds. So I'm trying to get 120, plus grams of protein in a day. At first, man, this was super hard, and then I realized, "Hey, what works for me?" Okay, I'm gonna have 3 or 4 pasture-raised eggs in the morning, cooked in grass-fed butter. I'm gonna add some raw, sheep's milk cheese to this, maybe an ounce or 2 of that. I'm gonna throw in some pasture-raised bacon or some, grass-fed beef sausage, and then I may make me like a little shake or something to go with it. Hey, I'm getting 50 to 60 grams of protein in that first meal. Right? Like, wow, look at that. I've already hit almost half my protein load for the day. I'm not overstuffed. I feel great. I'm ready to rock and roll. So you have to find out what works best for you. So, this is where I run into, oh, Dr. Nathan, I don't like the taste of red meat. Okay, there's plenty of other things that we can get out there. Or I don't like chicken and turkey. Great. Like, hey, grass-fed beef, bison, venison. These are all fantastic things that you can do. Lamb, maybe based on your culture or based on your genetic background, choosing the type of meats that would have been readily available for you. If I'm Native American partially and also like Northern European, what was widely available there? What are the things that they would hunt? Venison, wild turkey, those type of things. They were readily available. Maybe in Northern European, some types of grass-fed lamb, right? Those type of things. Those would have been readily available. So I'm going to consume a high amount of those. I would even throw eggs in here, pasture-raised eggs as well. Some other sources, the wild caught fish, wild caught seafood. Make sure you're very, very specific about where you're getting these, read into the companies where you're getting these. Do they test for heavy metals? Do they make sure that they're low in microplastics? Those type of things. Um, those are always super, super important. Like, should you go out and just eat a bunch of raw tuna all the time? No. Why? Because it's high in mercury unless it's tested. So we got to be a little careful with those type of things. So we want to make sure these are coming from really good sources. But this kind of gives you a breakdown of the grams per ounce, so you can calculate that in. And remember, what we're trying to get is basically about a pound, a gram per pound of body weight, ideal body weight. So if you're 200 pounds, but you want to be 150, right? We're shooting for 150 grams of protein, per day, give or take. Okay. So that's what we're looking for there. Fasting strategies, right? This goes along with nutrition for a lifetime. Why? Because we should all be varying the type of fasting that we do. Intermittent fasting, 12 to 16 hours. This is just a done deal. This is what we should be doing, on a regular basis. Maybe, if you're somebody who's been like fasting too much, right? Because yes, you can do that. What's the point of breaking down damaged tissue if we're not rebuilding it as well? So maybe you're somebody like that and you're like, you know what? I've been fasting too much. I need to focus on the rebuilding phase. Well, guess what? You should still be getting at least 12 hours between your last meal of the day, first meal of the next day. Why? Because our guts need to rest a little bit. That is just what we, as a human species have always done. We've had periods of rest there. So this is where you can kind of vary it based on what you need and what you're doing. Intermittent fasting, I kind of categorize it like this. There's no exact science to this when you look at it across the board. Autophagy fasting, breaking down damaged parts of the body and parts of the cell, 16 to 24 hours. Maybe you're somebody that says, hey, you know what? I'm going to go for a few months and I'm going to do it like this, where I'm doing a 14-hour intermittent fast. Once a week, I'm throwing in a dinner to dinner fast, 24-hour fast. And then I'm going to have, maybe Saturday, Sunday, where I'm only doing a 12-hour fast, right? We're varying that up. Maybe you're somebody that's like, you know what? I've had a lot of damage to my body over the years. So once a quarter, I'm going to do a 2 to 3 day water fast, where I'm helping my body break it down, break down damaged parts of myself. Maybe you're somebody who's like, ooh, I really don't like to do that every quarter. Maybe once a year, I'm going to just like, suck it up and do a 7-day water fast. Like, hey, that's fantastic. That's a great choice, but vary the type of fasting. We are all built to have some level of fasting built into it, and start small, start where you're at, right? And then kind of advance as you go over time. If you need more help with that, reach out to Dr. Rebecca or myself to give you some guidance on that. Cause yeah, not everybody is ready to just say, you know what? I'm gonna go do a 5-day water fast. Ooh, man, that can kick your butt if you're not ready for it. Maybe you're somebody that needs to do a paleo ketogenic diet for 3 months, and then boom, now we can do it because you're able to produce ketones. You're using those much better, and you get a better result with that. So kind of take that for where it is, but we all need that. Some plant-based superfood additions. I put this in here because I'm a big fan of using these in my life, right? Like, so right now, if you were going to analyze my diet, I'm probably 80 to 90% animal based. That's where I feel my best right now. So my diet is full of, I do a lot of bison and grass-fed beef. Um, I do a lot of like I do some local bacon that we get from a local farmer. I do a lot of pasture raised eggs. I do a lot of raw cheese. I even do some raw goat's milk. So a big part of my diet is there, but I still add some of these superfoods in. Why? Because I feel great when I do, and that's like organic berries. Like, there is very rarely a time, unless I have had a couple times where I went completely carnivore. But like, man, wild blueberries, amazing. My brain, my gut, my body feels so good when I consume those. Hemp seeds, chia seeds. Again, we are always getting these with our family. I like to add them into the kids like A2 organic yogurt that they consume, as some superfoods with good omega fatty acids, some good, essential amino acids in there. Things like mushrooms, like shiitake, maitake, some of these different berry mushrooms, and the way we prepare them can be super great. Dark chocolate, high in antioxidants. Like, look at that. Good news, right? Now when we choose our dark chocolate, we try to get some that utilize things like, maybe organic maple syrup to sweeten it, or dates to sweeten it, or some monk fruit, right? Or some stevia. Like, we'll use dark chocolate that does that. Our family pretty much stays away from cane sugar and sugar just in general, definitely stays away. We do not consume aspartame and sucralose. If we add some sweetener to our, coffee or something like that, it's usually monk fruit extract that we'll do with that. Organic olive oil, right? Local bee pollen. If you've ever looked at the nutrient density of bee pollen, it's absolutely amazing. Um, and then also like chlorella, spirulina, seaweed, algae. These things contain, almost the building blocks of life, right? Their nutrient density is so high. So those are always great things to add to that. So to kind of wrap this up here, guys, if I'm have a patient in front of me and we're choosing like an anti-inflammatory diet, right? Like, maybe they have joint pain, maybe they have like some autoimmune stuff going on. Like, here's some of the things I do. Avoiding gluten, grains, and conventional dairy, right? That's going to be a big part of that to lower inflammation. Does that mean all gluten is bad? No, not necessarily. If we have a great terrain, we're in a healthy state, and you find some really good quality sourdough, that may be great for you and you can do that. But if you're showing signs of inflammation and autoimmune, those also may be super killers to you. So when I have a patient that I'm really prioritizing anti-inflammatory, I'm going to lead them more into a nutrient-dense keto, paleo type diet. Maybe in some more those more severe cases, maybe a period of time where we're going like nose to tail carnivore with it. And that's where I really, really see some amazing things happen. GI issues, autoimmune, nose to tail carnivore diet, at least for a period of time, see phenomenal results with this. And again, like the previous slide, you can also utilize that, but we're really trying to avoid some of these plant toxins, at least for a period of time. If they're going to consume some plants, they need to make sure they break it down with, again, like pressure and heat. So maybe like an Instapot, crock pot, that type of thing, to make them easier to digest. Sometimes we use some supplementation to help them break that down if I can't get them fully overdue, like a carnivore diet or something like that. but that's where these can be really, really helpful with GI issues, autoimmune. Cardiovascular, sometimes with a patient that has some severe cardiovascular issue, for a small amount of time, I may put them on a high plant-based type of diet that's loaded with antioxidants. For me, it's more of like a Mediterranean diet. I'm usually still with them, avoiding grains and gluten and conventional dairy. So I like to use the term more antioxidant rich paleo diet, right? They're eating meat, vegetables, fruit, nuts, and seeds. That's like their diet, right? That's what we're consuming. And again, we see really good results with this, especially on blood markers as well when we consume that. Cancer, diabetes, ketogenic diet, man, massively powerful, nutrient dense ketogenic diet. And then there's certain type of cancers that respond more to a more like not fully plant-based, but heavy on the plants, right? Maybe it's some type of a breast cancer, right? Like that may respond a little bit better to a plant-based type of diet. Maybe it's prostate cancer, something like that. But again, leaning still towards like a ketogenic state is where we get to see some very powerful things happen with that. Let me be clear, I'm not saying that a ketogenic diet is a treatment for cancer, but again, a very powerful tool to utilize as an adjunct type of therapy to go along with what you're doing, what's been, approved by, maybe your naturopathic oncologist or your oncologist, your physicians, things like that. Ketogenic diet is massively powerful. Why? At its core state, because of what it does to the mitochondria, right? The more I read, the more I break down. If you look at Thomas Siegfried's work, even Otto Warburg back in the day, cancer is a mitochondrial dysfunction, it's a mitochondrial disease. Support the mitochondria. That's also why fasting can be such a big deal in something like cancer and doing it specifically. Why? Because again, you are doing what's called mitophagy. You're breaking down damaged mitochondria in order to rebuild new healthy mitochondria as well. So again, when we're thinking about like what we should be doing, there is no such thing as an optimal human diet, but there are so many commonalities there in what we should be doing. Focused on essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, avoiding those seed oils, eating a lot of good healthy protein and fat for that first meal, varying the type of diet that we do throughout a lifetime, varying the type of fasting that we're doing throughout a lifetime, and understanding that hormesis, stress that's a good stress ends up producing a good result, and that genetically we're designed that way, ancestrally we're designed that way. Common sense and logic tells us that what was available, what was not available based on the seasons, based on the hunt, based on the fishing expedition, based on going to search for plants, out in nature. So also too, don't forget N equals one, right? Like, how do you feel? What is your terrain that you're putting the food into? And again, this is why, like working with Dr. Rebecca or myself, we can give you some guidance on this. Where one of our big primary jobs is that to help like kind of guide you to what we think based on your journey to get to where you're at, what you're dealing with. That's why we spent countless hours, at this point, thousands of hours studying this type of stuff to be able to guide that. So hopefully this was able to clear some things up for you and understanding that, yeah, nutrition can be overwhelming. It can be, just this giant elephant in the room. But if we are able to understand the principles and foundations that go across all diets, some of the commonalities that are so important to building up our physiology and making sure that our biochemistry is working well, guess what? That's where we can simplify things. So I hope this has helped to simplify things. I hope has been super helpful for you. This is a topic that I think can absolutely change your life. So again, go out there, eat a nutrient-dense diet, and provide those raw building materials that are amazing for the human body, for the human brain, and to optimize your life and to increase your longevity. So until next time, guys, I'm signing off. I hope you guys have a phenomenal day.
If you enjoyed the Doctors Warren podcast, make sure to subscribe. That way you get immediate access when a new episode is published. And if this episode has been helpful to you, please leave us a 5-star review. Let us know where you're listening from, how this has been helping you. And by leaving that review, you help us get our message out to more people.